On the importance of critical raw materials for the energy transition. I'm Monica Gigri, I'm head of unit at the Commission in DG Energy. Grateful for the music. I feel like a superstar now. Okay, the moment is gone. This is an interesting topic. It has been resurfacing these last couple of years. And it is, critical raw materials are important for many things, but here during the EU Sustainable Energy Week, we are going to focus on why it is important for the energy transition and in energy in general. And so, because the smart words will not be said by me, but by the keynote speaker and the panelists, with that I will right away ask Paula Pino, Director at the DG Energy, responsible for a long list of things, so just transition, consumers, energy security, efficiency and innovation, to give a keynote speech for us today. Paula.
Thank you very much, Monica, and good morning. It's good to see that the room is full, and I'm not surprised given the interest around this very critical topic of critical raw materials. And we know about the vision for the European Union. By 2050, we should become the first climate-neutral continent in the world. We've set the vision, we delivered on the regulatory framework, all the energy pieces of legislation which had been proposed as under the heading Fit for 55 across the board are now part of the EU acquis. So we have the targets, notably we have very ambitious targets for the deployment of renewable energy, for instance. And now the next question is, and how do we deliver those? And if we just think of all the clean technologies that, and clean energy technologies that we need to deliver on these targets in order to make this vision a reality, this vision of a climate-neutral continent in the world, we immediately come across critical raw materials. This is what we will need for all the clean energy technologies that are required for the transition, and wherever you look into, you find critical raw materials needs. And if we look at how we are progressing in terms of really implementing our targets and implementing our goals towards this net zero, there are very, very good news. Despite, maybe even also thanks to the horrible war in Ukraine, where our main gas supplier suddenly said no more, and we said no more either, because we don't want to be dependent on this one single and not a reliable supplier of gas. And as we accelerated the deployment of renewables in record ways, and just to give you very, very concrete figures, 2 months ago, April 2024, for the first time in the history of the energy system in Europe, fossil fuels accounted for less than a quarter of our electricity generation in a single month. Last year, we had already broken records in terms of the electricity generated from renewable energy sources. This was accelerated also by the war in Ukraine and the fact that with Repower EU, we set a very clear strategy in terms of how are we going to phase down and out our dependence on Russian fossil fuels. So we're seeing very, very concrete results. But if we look further, the fact of the matter is that for all of this to happen, we will need the critical raw materials. And it is fair to say that there is no energy transition with such materials. And whether you focus on wind turbines, or the chips that you need, or the batteries that you need, it all leads again to the critical raw materials. So if we want to harness the power of wind, we need critical raw materials. If we want to capture the energy of sun, we need the critical raw materials. If we need batteries to store the renewable energy sources, we need critical raw materials. And this means that the demand for these materials has skyrocketed in the past years. And mind you, it's not just the EU who is looking for these raw materials, obviously, because, and this is good news, the whole globe is in a journey of an energy transition at different paces, with different rhythms, but everyone is engaged. And we'll have here also in the panel colleagues from the IEA, notably, where this is coming together in the discussions that it's not just the EU, it's the whole world that is decarbonizing. So really looking for everyone for the critical raw materials. And what is the issue about this is that not the whole globe has critical raw materials. So they are actually concentrated in a few countries. And so we've seen this film before. So we have concentration of these minerals in some countries. And so as we decarbonize, the risk is that, again, we find ourselves overly dependent on single suppliers. This is a real risk, because when you look at our demand, for instance, for lithium that you need to take for batteries, and the demand there is expected to increase 12 times by 2030, 21 times by 2050, alone in the EU. If you take the global figures, there the demand for lithium is expected to increase 18 times by 2030, 90 by 2050. So who will supply all these lithium? So it is obvious that we already rely on imports, and we will continue to rely on imports. So the key issue and the word is make sure we diversify as much as we can our sources of imports of this raw materials as much as we can. And this is precisely the logic behind the Critical Raw Materials Act. And we have here today also Madalina Ivanica, our colleague from DG GROW, whose team has been behind this piece of legislation. And it's the first time that the EU goes into this field, precisely because we've seen, and we're learning from our mistakes, and we've seen that we need from the beginning to diversify. So in this Critical Raw Materials Act, it's about looking into the mining, the processing, and ensure that we can achieve as much as possible diversification. But we know precisely that this is not something that we can do on our own. We are limited by geology. You may have some critical raw materials in the EU, many not yet explored, but there is a limit to it, and clearly not enough for all the needs that we have. If you take just the example of lithium, but I could mention many, many others. So cooperation and strategic partnerships is absolutely critical. So what we're doing already now is to look at the globe and see who can we partner up with, both with off-taking countries, but also with supplying countries. And that's why, for instance, with the US, we now have a group, the Minerals Security Partnership, where we come together and we convey to the supplying countries the same narrative in terms of we want sustainably mined critical raw materials. And it is a powerful message if the EU and the US can partner up on this matter as key off-takers. But we're also, of course, engaging in several other international fora. For instance, in the G7, in the G20, I mentioned the IEA, which is also working on critical minerals, and we are now also represented, the Commission is represented and co-chairing the UN panel on critical energy transition minerals, because as we go further in this decarbonization journey, we will, of course, also need to work with developing countries. Many of the developing countries have these critical raw materials, and we want to make sure that that the supply of such materials also benefits the local population, that it's mined in a sustainable way, and that we can really partner up and make sure that the clean transition also applies to those actually supplying these materials. So we're working on capacity building, on training, on making the skills available and partnering up with these supplying countries. So what I mean to say is that really securing critical raw materials, securing its supply, strengthening our industrial policy as we need to diversify and really need those materials for the clean energy technologies, some of which we really also want to manufacture in the EU, and the transition to a cleaner energy future are not separate goals, but really do come together, and we need to pursue them in an inclusive and converging way. And this is why the journey here on critical raw materials is still very, very long, very challenging. One of the challenges is that even in the cases where we do have the resources domestically in the EU, some are still very wary of exploring those sources. But at some point, we will need to take difficult choices. We cannot not have it all. We cannot say no coal and phasing out from gas and diversifying and still not seizing the potential that we have in terms of domestic resources. But we need, and that is the role for the regulators, to make sure that if there is mining of critical raw materials in Europe, that we do it in a safe way, that we do it in a sustainable way, and in a way that reassures the people in the EU that this can be done in a proper way. And there's still also a long way to go in this field. So, to conclude, I repeat what I said at the very beginning. Critical materials are indeed critical. They are absolutely decisive for the clean energy transition. We know that we need to harness their potential. We know that there are challenges to tackle on the way. And we know for sure that this is not something that the EU can do on its own. We need to cooperate with countries across the world, but also across the value chain with industry, with civil society, with citizens, to also make them aware of the importance of this. So with this, I leave you in the hands of a great, great panel. Thank you for joining EUSEW, and I'm sure we'll have very insightful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. I think with this speech, we have set the tone. We also see now that critical raw materials is an area of discussion which impacts many different things. It's a question of industrial policy, it's a question of energy transition, and it also raises the issues of diversification and secure and sustainable supply chains. Now, this complexity is very nicely reflected in our panel today. And with that, I would like to introduce you the panel members. I hope that the order in which I will present them will be the right one. I would right away start with Madalina Ivanica. She's acting head of unit in DG GROW, responsible for energy-intensive industries and raw materials. We have next to her Francesco Gattillo, Vice President External Affairs of the EU at Albemarle. I hope that's right. Next one, we have Irina Patrahau, Strategic Analyst for Energy, Raw Materials and Climate at the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. And then we have Shoban Dir, Critical Minerals Analyst and Battery Metals Expert from the International Energy Agency. And last but not least, we have Patrick ten Brink, Director-General at the European Environmental Bureau. I will ask now the panelists to just give a very short 2-minute statement, each of you, in order to help you, the audience, to measure what the scope of the discussions can actually extend to, and also to help you put questions afterwards via Slido, for which we will have a nice QR code appearing on the screen at some point. But I would like to, and here you go, so phones out, take a picture and link to Slido. whenever you have any questions popping up in your mind, just put it in. And then at the end of the session, we will have sufficient time for your questions so that the panelists can put to the test on those probably very encouraging and ambitious questions that you will put to us. And with that, I would like to then start with Madalina. So the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Monica. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be here to touch upon the topic of the day, obviously, and I say this obviously being subjectively because I've been working on this file for some time already, and we've been doing this for several years very intensely in our unit to manage to come up with a European framework that deals with critical raw materials. And we've been successful in doing that. Paola already set the framework and why it was the need for a European critical raw materials policy at the EU level, so I'm not going to come back to that. I just want to pitch you what is the Critical Raw Materials Act all about, because it's only 2 minutes, so I'll try to do fast. This is the first time when the EU has a legal framework to deal with critical raw materials. The work on CRMs has started many years ago. We've been doing criticality assessments and looking at the importance and the criticality of raw materials for the European industry from 2011. And with every reiteration of this assessment, we notice that more and more materials become critical for our economy because the economy is changing, the industry is changing, we are modernizing, we are decarbonizing, so we need critical raw materials. So now we have a list of 34 critical raw materials, but then out of these, 17 are essential for the energy transition and also for the defense and space application. So this is what the Act is talking about. So the focus is on the clean transition, the energy, and the defense and aerospace applications. We set for the first time also some clean benchmarks. We have some political goals towards we want to reach and to go. And this is in order to help us move faster. The benchmarks that the Act sets forward are not legally obligatory targets, and they are for the entire EU, but it's important to be ambitious and to work towards something. And I'm sure you know them already. We want to work on both fronts, domestically, to build our domestic capacities, because we need to be stronger in the EU, and Paola already mentioned the need to do that, because we are facing crisis, we are facing fierce global competition, and we are leaders worldwide in decarbonization and climate neutrality. So we want to be stronger domestically and reduce the dependency. And in order to do this, we are going to identify strategic projects that are essential for the EU to move into this direction. But as Paul already mentioned, we also will also need raw material from outside. We don't have everything in Europe, and given the increased demand over the coming years, we need to make sure that we have supplies for our industry. So that's why we have a strong international pillar of our Act, which builds on the strategic partnerships that we've been signed so far. We have 13. And just to let you know that the Act entered into force on the 23rd of May, so only 2 weeks ago, and the first meeting of the board took place right in this very room. So you are really actually sitting on the seats of the member states that actually are composing the board when our first discussion and the launching of the implementation of the Critical Raw Materials Act took place. But besides this building of our capacities, we noticed that we also have some vulnerabilities when it comes to understanding better the supply chains, the situation on the market, and the fact that we face certain export restrictions and even bans for certain technology or raw materials woke us up that we need a proper monitoring mechanism and we need risk mitigation measures. So that's why we are also looking into building this European system to make sure that we have an early warning mechanism and that we do stress testing to look at different scenarios that might affect our supply chains. And a last thought is we will, of course, need more raw materials. We look at extraction, but we also need to boost the secondary raw materials market. So that's a very important pillar of our Act, how to build a strong secondary raw material market by improving circularity, by improving sustainability, by looking into waste streams that have not been checked before and identifying the potential that is there, because there is potential, and this obviously will help us in reaching the demand that we have. So this is the act in terms of the legal provisions, but besides that, we also work with flanking measures to support this whole process, and we are investing a lot in research and innovation. Innovation is essential to move faster forward, to come up with substitution alternatives to raw materials, and to make sure that we have innovative technology for extraction, processing, refining, and recycling. So 1 billion euros within this financial multi-annual financial framework are dedicated for research and innovation for raw materials calls. And we also need to work on improving the skills. And that's something that the whole industry is identifying as one of the challenges, that we don't have enough skilled force. So that's another aspect that we would like to work on more in the months and the years to come, to build a strong European industrial setup. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maddalena. You can see the enthusiasm and the passion when it comes to the topic. I would like to ask now Francesco for your introductory statements. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, thank you for the invite. First of all, maybe a short introduction about Albemarle for those who don't know the company. We are a US-based company, one of the largest lithium producers globally. We have currently production in the US, where we have a mine and a refining plant. We extract and refine lithium in Chile. We extract and refine lithium in Australia, and we have refining plants in China and also in Europe. So we do have a lithium refining plant in Langelsheim, Germany, which is active since 1923. So that's the first lithium producing plant in the world. I have an easy task today to convince you that lithium is an essential element for the energy transition. It's actually quite obvious. It's an irreplaceable element for batteries for EVs and for energy storage. What you probably don't know is that lithium has many other uses which are fundamental. Pharma is one use, but also specialty glasses, for instance, for cooktop stove, lubricants for wind turbines, and also semiconductors. And all these technical uses of lithium, we manufacture lithium, we produce lithium in Germany. So that's a local production. Now, of course, you all know that the growth of demand for lithium will be quite substantial in the coming years. You have different forecasts. From our side, we expect a growth of at least 4 or 5 times by 2030, which is quite substantial. And unfortunately, at the moment, we do not see enough projects coming online, not just in Europe, but globally. So we do think that more investments will be needed to meet this demand. Investment will have to come both from the private sector and from the public sector. If I look at Europe, the Critical Raw Materials Act is a great first step for real, because it really sets the scene for what will come in the coming years. Shorter permitting and clear permitting timelines are essential. The attention that the critical raw material has on due diligence and sustainability are also essential to make sure that the extraction and refining are done in a sustainable way. At the same time, we will need more financial support to operate in Europe, because the reality is that resources in Europe, unfortunately, are substantial, but they are not at the same level in some cases of what we have in Latin America and in Australia, and the costs to operate in Europe are generally higher. It is still important, of course, to make sure that we can use these resources, because it's essential for our security of supply. At the same time, the other element of the Critical Raw Material Act are the strategic partnership with third countries. Those will be also fundamental, because most likely we will rely on imports for some years, because even if we start mining and refining today in Europe, it will take some years before those resources will come online. So we will rely on imports. The good news, at least for lithium, is that lithium is present in friendly countries. I mentioned Chile, Australia, Other countries with important lithium resources are Canada and the US, so these are all good jurisdictions with rule of law, with respect for the environment and for human rights, so it's quite comfortable also for a company to operate in these countries. The other good news is that raw materials are recyclable. We are not simply replacing dependency on oil with dependency on raw materials, because oil, you burn it and it's gone. Raw materials remain there. A battery remains there, and the raw materials can be recycled and reused in other applications. So the dependency most likely will last only some years. Last point from my side, since we will have to depend on this relation with these countries, multi-stakeholder cooperation is essential to make sure that we have a fair and transparent relation with the resource-rich countries. So we need to ensure security of supply, but at the same time, sustainable sourcing, because the environmental protection in Chile, in Canada, in Australia, in all these countries is essential, and we need to also ensure a just transition to make sure that these countries can develop their local value chains, and the EU can really do a lot to support in that area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I would like to ask Irina to also give her short introductory statements. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's great to be here today and to see that critical raw materials are being, as you said, really the topic of the day, and they're really picked up across sectors, and their importance is no longer sort of ignored. We do a lot of work on the geopolitics of supply chains, both in relation to the energy transition, but also if you look at other types of vital sectors like the healthcare, defense, the digital industry. And we really see that the Critical Raw Materials Act and all the recent efforts that the Commission has really put into the last couple of years are really starting to take shape and really impacting, I think, all of the conversations, also at the national level, also at the provincial level. We're based in the Netherlands, and you can see that even sort of the provincial authorities are looking at ways that they can support these new ambitions of Europe and of national governments as well. And we do a lot of work on both sort of the implementation of the Act nationally and provincially, as I mentioned. So looking at really the mining and processing side and industry, and seeing what kind of needs they have, but also in what way they're interacting with the government and trying to pursue these goals of the Critical Raw Materials Act. And at the same time, you also look at downstream companies. So, for example, an electricity grid provider or a defense company, and they are also really looking at the geopolitical risks and the supply chain risks in raw materials, in relation to raw materials. And what I wanted to address today is really this gap between the two sides of the supply chain, because I think there's a lot of very good work done at the upstream, so really looking at mining and processing, so at the supply side, let's say, and then if you look at demand, there's also, or the really downstream system integrators and manufacturers, they're also really looking for ways to build resilience into their supply chains and try to sort of do better than they have until now. And what we're noticing is that there's a pretty big gap in between, which is just caused by the opacity of global supply chains. Because, of course, if you want to have a transformer station as an electricity grid provider, it's not that you just take the copper and aluminum that you need and put them in your transformer station. There's so many steps in between and so many suppliers and subcontractors, and they're spread over countries and continents. And you really see that it's very overwhelming, and it's very difficult for companies downstream to really make the connection between their operations and the really upstream side of the supply chain, even though they perhaps would want to. They often have, sight into the first or second tier of their supply chain, and if the immediate subcontractors say that there's really not a big issue in the supply chain, it's very difficult. It takes a lot of resources, a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of human capital to identify what the supply chain looks like. And of course, the question becomes, is it worth spending all this time and resources to really identify every single supply chain, what it looks like, and map it across the globe? Or, which I think is the more realistic option, is how do we learn to deal with this uncertainty and with acknowledging that we don't have all of the information, but we want to support more up and midstream operations in Europe and in other sort of reliable countries, and we want our companies here to have a secure supply of raw materials. So I think this is a gap that is not so much discussed and not so much talked about in the public debate. However, it's something that we in our research at least face constantly when we are discussing with companies. And I think we need to, together, I don't have the sort of solution, unfortunately, but I think together we need to discuss it more and see how to make that connection between really the downstream producers and the upstream, and how to make sure that the two match and are able to contribute to the European sort of goals and strategic autonomy and, of course, net zero goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you can hear, there are more and more aspects and elements that we can bring up just while talking about critical raw materials. I hope that you are receiving inspiration and you are entering your questions already in Slido, because there will be time for those as well. But then, please, Shoban, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. It's great to be part of this excellent panel. So I just want to start with a statistic. So to meet 1.5 degrees and to be on track for the net zero emissions, in 2040, all critical minerals that are needed, the key energy transition minerals that are needed to be on track, total about 30 million tons. And that sounds like a lot of mining. This includes all the copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt, graphite, and rare earths that are needed in 2040. So 30 million tons, that's a lot of mining. However, if we look at just last year, 9 billion tons of coal were mined, and that's just coal last year. And I think this sense of scale is really important, that 300 times more coal was mined then than we need in 2040 to be on track for 1.5. So I think that's how I'd just start. And of course, we need to be very careful with critical mineral mining that is done in a sustainable way that protects communities and the environment. But it is also very important to realize how much mining is already done in the fossil fuel industry. So at the IEA, we've traditionally been analyzing everything energy, and that's kind of our place. But critical minerals has become a major focus because it really is the fundamentals of everything clean energy. All clean energy technologies rely on these key critical minerals. So recently we just released our Global Critical Minerals Outlook, where we looked at the recent market trends and developments, investment policy, developments, technology, and as well as doing supply and demand outlooks for these key minerals. So I'm just going to give you a couple key findings from there. So first, looking at the minerals that we are concerned particularly for a few, and I'll group two together, copper and lithium. Lithium we know is essential for lithium-ion batteries. Copper is used in all key clean energy technologies and grid networks. So in 2035, based on announced projects and the mining projects globally, we meet only 70% of the demand for copper needed to be on track for our climate targets. That's not even net zero, that's just our climate pledges. So that's only 70% would be met. And for lithium, it's less than 50%. So we really, really do have a key issue in the long term of having enough of these key minerals that we need to fuel our energy transition. Now, recently, you've seen a lot of price volatility. If you've been following the markets, lithium fell by 75% in price last year after huge dramatic rises the years before. Nickel, cobalt, graphite, all around 30 to 45% drop in price last year. And this was driven by supply actually outpacing demand, and this was an downstream inventory overhang. And this is a key issue, but with this price volatility, it gives a lot of uncertainty. And obviously we can say lower prices means cheaper clean technologies, cheaper batteries, cheaper solar, but it also means less investment in new supply. So this is a key concern going forward. And then a final concern for other minerals are, as has been mentioned many times, diversification is key. But what we see over the last few years has been very little progress in terms of diversification. In fact, for most minerals, almost all, it's gone in the other direction, both on the mining side and the refining side. And particular concerns are graphite and rare earth elements, where their concentration is extremely high in a single country in China, in their supply of mining and refining, and that is set to continue based on announced projects. So there are solutions, and many of which have been touched on really well by the other panelists, but particularly recycling is a key area where the EU has a large place to play, and there's been excellent first steps with the Critical Raw Materials Act, the battery regulation, but this really could be a very key area for the EU to focus, but also it does need this investment in primary supply and conducive environment to developing domestic resources. But these are many of the issues that have been touched on, and all of this still needs to be with meeting environmental, social standards and ensuring these are protected. And this is another area we've seen mixed progress so far. So I'll finish there, but thank you very much. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. And then Patrick, please.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm Patrick Tembrick, the Secretary-General of the European Environmental Bureau. We represent 180 civil society organizations across Europe, and even beyond Europe, in 40 countries. We're also part of the EU Raw Materials Coalition, bringing together 56 civil society organizations from 19 countries, and I think the coalition has been engaged in the process and tried to contribute. So first of all, thank you. I want to start with democracy and end with democracy, but then I've got some critical raw materials bits in the middle. So, I mean, we've just had the election just now, so we're clearly we have a new situation, but also a continuation of the situation. But one thing is clear from it, we need a social contract for a way forward for this Green Deal. There is still commitment for a Green Deal. We heard the Secretary-General of the EPP mentioning it. It's all in the manifestos. But a Green Deal itself is not enough. We need very much a social deal, a social contract within it, which brings into the impacts and the community engagement and issues of democracy. We also have the need for raw materials. We need a competitive industry and the sustainability and a race to the top. But we need to do this in a certain way. So we need like a one planet economy. How can we encourage innovation and the transition within the context of a one planet economy? So we ourselves, with a wider network and wider consultation, have put together a European Pact for the Future, which is a green and social deal for a one planet economy. But of course, Europe and this issue here is global, and it has to be within a global pact for the future. So just to put that in a context, you started off saying that the demand will go higher and higher by 19 times, 50 times, or 99 times, or 4 times, 5 times. But all of this looks very, very exponential. And at one level, this is exciting for producers, but at the other level, we need to really double check on what we need. So an assessment of demand is required. And because also for industry, you don't want to have stranded assets in the end, whether it's battery installations or extra mines. You plan for 300, you only need 100. Where's that money gone? So there's an assessment that's absolutely required. But there's also no one's really looked at moderation demand, apart from circular economy, which you mentioned, but we need to look at demand moderation. Do we need 100-fold what we are using now? And perhaps not, because say, for example, in the transport sector, do you need to replace every single internal combustion engine with an SUV electric vehicle? Clearly not. So I think if you change 10 to 1 and have public transport, you actually reduce a huge amount the demand for materials. If you go for an electric bicycle to take your children to school rather than SUV, you reduce the demand for lithium a lot. And there's still sufficient demand. I'm not worried about the future of the lithium industry. I think there's plenty of demand there, but we need to look at this moderation of demand. What is needed? What is sufficient? Because we can't just exponentially grow. Similarly, the circular economy has been mentioned, but just to add a number to that, currently, if you look at the material use, it's 11.5% of our materials which are actually in the circular loop. So 88.5% are thrown away. So there's a massive potential here. So that has to be a priority here. So we need to ramp it up. And then 2 other issues here, but even when you take demand reduction, even when you take circular economy, there will of course be an increased demand. Whether it's 100 times or 5 times is then an open question, or 2 times. That's for you. But there's 2 issues then. If you're going to do mining in Europe or internationally or whatever, there's 2 other elements. One is the whole environmental and social standards and governance. Several of you have mentioned it, but this really has to be done. It's also indigenous rights. If you look at global mining, over 50% of the materials come from indigenous lands. So this has to be, and it's 70% if you look more forward. It also has to link to anti-corruption measures, because if you look at certain mining practices in certain parts of the world, it is an unfortunate reality. So we need to tackle it. And we need to implement the law. We need to respect the multilateral environmental agreements. So there is potential. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying do it incredibly carefully and so on. And the last thing is back to the democracy. We need to make sure that this is done with the support of the local communities. This is not, and others mentioned we need to go faster with permitting. But the problem with permitting is the history of why it's taken so long for permitting in some areas is because in 2008, in the financial crisis, there was an austerity package and they cut back on a lot of the abilities of local and regional authorities to do assessments and provide the information. So the problem is not environmental standards. The problem is the capacity of the local and regional inspectorates and permit agencies to be able to provide the information to help with the assessment, the permit to go quickly. So if you invest in that, you invest in data, if you invest in IT, and then you still engage the public, and you make sure you listen, make sure, and I think you said that, there's some contributions to local community, then you can get the community on board. I know it's not easy, but if one takes the time for that, then actually, because everywhere in the world, people don't like things in the neighborhood, so you might as well speak to people and make sure it works. So if that's happened, then the community is part of the solution, the social contract is supported, and you go back to having local democratic health and resilience, and we all agree that we need a healthy democracy. And so like that, go back to the circle. So if we do all of that, then I think we've got an agenda of hope rather than an agenda of fear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we can stop talking now because I think everything has been solved by now. I do have several questions that were prepared for the panel, but actually there were already a few questions that you, with your introductions, you already answered. The whole balance between the energy transition and the sustainability aspects, environmental, human rights aspects. So with that, what we have talked a bit less about is probably the geopolitics a bit. So we know that critical raw materials, we heard whether it's 4 times, 20 times, 99 times, we will need more, exponentially more. And that raises obviously geopolitical issues, diversification or security of supply issues. Isn't it too late for us? I mean, Europe sometimes lags behind in certain areas. Isn't too late for us to actually jump on this train? And what are the geopolitical challenges that you also find with regards to this? I want to know who would like to come in first on this point. Irina, please.
Yeah, I can start. I think, yeah, it's always difficult to look at the relationship between critical minerals and geopolitics because, of course, the question is the increasing demand of critical minerals the issue for geopolitics, or is it geopolitics that is impacting or is making critical minerals really more vulnerable and more problematic? Because I think, I think the way we see it and the way I see it is really that critical raw materials, for a very long time, they weren't really at the forefront of policy attention or attention of industry, because they were also not, the geopolitical sort of tensions were also not at the level that they are today. So they were sort of, this problem has been simmering in the background, and now because critical raw materials, because Europe is so dependent and there's a supply concentration in a couple of countries, that is why critical minerals can be used as a foreign policy tool and really to further political and geopolitical ambitions. So I think it's, it's not so much about the materials. Of course, we need more materials, and of course, we need better supply and more sustainable supply. But I would argue it's not so much just about the materials, it's about the geopolitics. And I think we are not too late. I think we should 100%, go for it. But we also have to look forward at what other issues could come up that in the future could also be used as critical raw materials are used. So really look at what other things can be used as instruments, and not, because critical raw materials are now very important, and we are doing a lot of effort, and I'm sure that our position will increase substantially in the next decade or decades. So we also need to think about what other issues are there so that we try to act earlier, prevent the issue, than mitigate it afterwards.
Shaban?
Sure, thanks for the question. So obviously there's a lot of risks with geopolitically, and I guess I'd start with the supply of all these key critical minerals is actually more concentrated than the supply of all oil and gas today. So, and we know how oil and gas supply has dominated a lot of geopolitics in our modern history. So it is a very important area to be aware of, and there can be risks of monopolies, economic coercion, and locking out new entrants. So this is a key area of focus. There are things that can be done, and partnerships and these kind of aspects have been mentioned already. But particularly interesting is to look at the success of the IRA, the US Inflation Reduction Act. That really has galvanized investment to the US and has changed a lot in the critical minerals market and domesticating a lot of certain supplies. So there is things that can be done, and the EU is following suit with the Critical Raw Materials Act, but these are still, it's going to take some big changes to diversify and reduce these geopolitical dependencies. I think is Europe too late? I don't think so. The market, it's not just catching up, it's an opportunity to take part of this very, very fast-growing market. The market value for critical minerals in the energy space is about 300 billion, and that's set to grow to 800 billion in more than double by 2040. So that's a place of growth that the EU should want to take. But yeah, we do need to be really careful. And, for example, the recent Chinese graphite licenses are required for export. That's a key concern, and that's following things that happen for germanium, gallium. And this does mean there'll be frictions in these dependencies, there'll vulnerabilities, supply shocks. So it does really highlight this as a key area. And again, recycling is a very key area to help reduce this.
Madalena?
Yes, and if I may add to that, I fully agree with Jovan that we are not late, but we need to be fast. And that's the key point here. We need to be faster. Everything, I fully agree with everything you said. Just let us remind that in Europe, we are a mining, we have mining nations in Europe, and we have countries that have tradition, and they are doing this, including critical raw materials mining, and they do this properly and sustainable. And we have exploration activities, and we have geological surveys that are looking into the potential. So all this is already there, and also to remind you that we are globally the first globally when it comes to the technology, the export of technology, mining technology including. So we are really good in Europe. We have what we need. As I said, we need to be fast and to not be scared to take the responsibility for what needs to be done.
Yes, Patrick?
Yeah, just to mention here, you had mentioned that we're fortunately supported by friendly countries who are supplying, but just because they're friendly doesn't mean you can just do anything you want. And there's also a competition for countries that may decide whether they go with China or not. So I just wanted to raise the issue of the approach, because I think that just importing raw materials from a lot of countries may be great for importers, but for the country itself, they may actually want to go up the value chain. And I think we need to move away from pure competition, but towards partnerships and collaboration. So move away from a sort of extractive, almost exploitative model of the past, which is the colonial past, and move post-colonial and actually engage in partnerships and say, listen, we have a good relationship, we'll trust, we'll make sure you have something in your economy, you make sure we don't exploit and extract, and then actually maybe then the countries will collaborate with Europe rather than with China, because if we have social standards and rights and respect inherent in it and move beyond the colonial past, then I think we've got an opportunity for progress.
Maybe just to react to that, I agree, actually. So from our side, we are doing what we can to localize production in these countries. So in both Chile and Australia, we both extract and refine materials. The next step in the value chain for batteries is not up to us, because that's the cathode active material manufacturing, and then cells, batteries, and electric vehicles. And respecting the entire chain is actually very important also for security of supply, because if I take the approach or the look at Europe, let's say that if we mine lithium here, we refine it here, and then we have to ship everything to China to turn it into cathode active materials, well, we are still dependent. So that's not a great approach. And the development of local value chain is essential. And again, I think Europe has a lot to offer compared to other countries in this sort of international competition. The strategic partnerships are key to develop these value chains and to bring EU actors there and to focus again on the entire value chain, because We cannot just have a battery manufacturing plant in Chile if we do not have a cathode active material manufacturing there. So again, focus on the entire value chain, also from the point of view of financing, because we mentioned the IRA. One thing that the IRA doesn't do very well is to be targeted at each part of the value chain. So the IRA gives money to the entire value chain, but you have the risk that you're missing a key piece of the value chain. So Europe should try to be a bit more efficient and targeted in supporting its industry.
Madalena?
I just want to comment on the strategic partnership, but that's exactly what we've been doing over the last few years when we've been signing all these 13 strategic partnerships with like-minded countries, but also with producing countries. We really look along the value chain, and these partnerships are built and they deal with sustainable raw materials value chain, and the focus is really to develop local value chains and local beneficiation. So if you look, all these MOUs are publicly available. If you look at what the lines of action, we don't only look at business development, so identification of good projects, but we also look at research and innovations, how we can cooperate better. We also look at how we can build the infrastructure and support the country development on the roads, on the energy infrastructure, digital infrastructure. We also look at how to build the capacities, local capacity, skills training, and also super important, how to help them improving on the ESG standards. So all these partnerships that we call win-win partnerships are really built with a holistic view in mind that we need to work together to build the local capacities and not, as you say, extract and run, but really help develop locally.
Thank you very much. So we have touched on many aspects also during your introduction, but also during this discussion. When it comes to the value chain and secure supply, whatever is available locally obviously is more secure. We have touched upon mining, but then I would like to go a bit into the recycling. Where are we with recycling these materials within the EU, and how can it make it more attractive? Siobhan?
So yeah, as we've touched on many times, recycling is essential, and I think the EU has done a really good job previously with electronic waste, and I think that's a very good place to base on and to build from. And then also with the Battery Regulation and Critical Raw Materials Act, there's a lot there, particularly in the battery regulation with recovered contents, recycling efficiency targets. So it's very encouraging. These are a key way to start with the regulation that do increase. But I do think there are some areas that can be improving, some key areas, particularly in EV battery recycling, which is going to be a key source of secondary critical minerals in the next decade. So right now, there's a bit of a misalignment with the waste codes and transportation codes of black mass, which is the kind of the end result after processing and shredding the battery. You have this that needs to be recycled, and it's also classed as hazardous waste. So this mismatch and difficulty makes it a very inefficient way to transport across different countries, makes it an inefficient supply chain. So that's a key area of focus. Implementation of the extended producer responsibility principle really needs focus as well, and that is it is covered in the battery regulation, but really implementation of it and very clear definition of it is essential. And then also ensuring that a very comprehensive take-back and collection infrastructure is developed is crucial. And I'd say on that, one of the interesting areas that we are concerned about is for EVs. If we look at conventional cars, after their first life, they are often exported to secondary markets to get more value. But with EVs, it's likely that could happen and would happen as well. And it's about how do we reclaim those? How are those batteries then recycled? What happens to them? So I think that's a key area of focus that we should start thinking about. So all of this, I think, are some key areas.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'll build on that. So I think from our side, there's like 4 particular things you can do to improve that. One is the inadequate product design for circularity. We mentioned the circularity, but a lot of products are not designed for longevity nor easy critical raw material recovery. So that's hindering the circularity. So we need to address that barrier here by better product design, better longevity, et cetera, and also use legislative clarity issues. The second is issue of information. There's a lack of information on product composition and materials. So we need to make sure people have that information. If you've got no information, you can't do much with it. So here we need to do more on that. And there's the product passport. We can be inspired by the WE directive, etc., and so on. The third is low collection rates and recycling rates, which you've already mentioned, so I won't repeat that. And the fourth is, again, inadequate recycling facilities, technologies, and economic viability of these. And so that's a matching of which technologies you have in which areas to ensure economies of scale and so on. So there you need to provide financial support in some areas. So this is how do we spend the money to make sure we have the infrastructure we need. So it's the critical infrastructure to support the critical materials. So I'd say those four things to build on what you said.
So yeah, just to say that it's true. These are key also parts that are dealt with the Critical Raw Materials Act. It's true that, for example, on the labeling requirements, we cover permanent magnets only, so we focus a little bit with the Act. We don't cover all the products, but it's true, the product design and the labeling requirements to know exactly what raw materials in there so that the recycler know exactly what technology to use to actually recover. So that's what we are going to do. It's part of the Act. The member states will need indeed to have a lot of investments ready to build the recycling facilities. That's something new, yeah, this infrastructure needs to be built there. And we also go a little bit further in looking into the mining tailing. So the potential that is already there, closed mines, active mines. We need also to go back and see what can be recovered because this waste is sitting there and there is potentially there. The only maybe thing to think when you think about recycling, especially on the mining, is that the purity of the raw materials and the quality that you get out because for battery, for example, raw material, you need really high, very high purity, which you not might find by recycling, but then of course there are other uses for that. So it's a circular economy, so that can be used. The only and the other thought I have is that all these waste streams will come and will become really a source of critical material in only a few years to come, as all these products are only now on the market. So meanwhile, we need to make sure that we have all the infrastructure and the capacities ready to actually take back these materials, recycle, and put them back. Yeah.
Can I jump in with the next question? Because it is related. The question of innovation. So what would be the key technologies? And I'm not only talking about the key technologies for actual renewable energy sources, but also for the different value chain elements for critical raw materials. We have heard recycling may need some, or also sustainable mining. So what would be your thoughts around this? Yeah.
So, yes. So from the innovation point of view, there is really a lot being done right now, above all in the battery space, with new battery technologies being developed. We have been talking for a while now about solid-state batteries that will be the next generation batteries using solid electrolyte, which would have a few advantages, higher energy density, meaning that we would have to use less materials actually, because it will be a more efficient use of materials. The battery will be inherently safer and less prone to fire. And of course, it would also be possible to improve the acceptance of the consumers, because the car would have a higher range. That's something which is being researched right now, and we hope that we will have the first batteries on the market in the coming years. On the mining side, we also see many developments, because above all in the lithium space, we see a lot of unconventional resources right now, which are potentially interesting. One thing that we, as many other companies, are working on is direct lithium extraction. So today in Chile, the way of extracting lithium is to pump up the brine, which is a watery solution, make it evaporate, and then refine the concentrate. Direct lithium extraction is the opposite. Instead of removing the water, you remove the lithium. That would have many advantages, because the brine could be pumped down again in the reservoir, so even from an environmental perspective, will be preferable. Production will be faster and much more efficient because we could increase the yield. There are also some issues there, though, because the paradox is that direct lithium extraction requires more fresh water compared to conventional lithium. So you need to bring desalinated water or use water not from the, of course, from the reservoir where people are using it. So there are many things that can be done. Key thing is to invest in research and innovation and tailor the technology to the actual mine.
Chopin, please.
Yeah, sure. I think, he's covered some very important ones there, but I would also maybe add one on the recycling end. So currently batteries, I'll specifically focus on batteries because it's such a key source. EV batteries and batteries are recycled by 3 methods. So there's pyrometallurgical, hydrometallurgical, and then there's an emerging technology that's more in the research stage called direct recycling. So pyro and hydro are very well suited to a poorly sorted feedstock of cells, different chemistries, all sorts, but they work pyro by melting it, getting the metals out, hydro by kind of leaching these original metals out. So you get these kind of fundamental metals at the end. Whereas direct recycling works by not kind of going back to the metal, but by regenerating the cathode. So you kind of keep a lot more of the economic value, but it's very specific to each chemistry. So it's not as flexible. But I think this is an area that really should be prioritized, particularly as we're seeing LFP, which is lithium iron phosphate, as a battery chemistry really surging at the moment in EVs. And this is a chemistry that doesn't have any nickel and cobalt, which means it's almost less economically viable to recycle. So I think this is a key area that should be focused on to get more value from that. The other chemistry I would maybe touch on back in the batteries I don't think was mentioned, was sodium ion. So sodium ion is the leading chemistry which doesn't contain any lithium. And so this saw a lot of progress when the lithium price was high, but then it reduced. And I think this is a key chemistry which is more sustainable, doesn't use anywhere near as much critical minerals in its chemistry. It allows the use of aluminium as the anode current collector, which lithium cannot, which means you reduce copper, and you're using sodium, which can be taken from seawater. So I think this is a key area which should be focused on to reduce critical mineral intensity. So those are some of the aspects I think are important.
Just to add to that, I don't have a specific technology in mind, but I wanted to come back to what you said at the beginning, that Europe is one of the largest or the largest exporter of mining technology. And I think that's also, this kind of equipment providers, service providers are really, based in Europe, are really leading in the mining and processing and recycling sort of operations all over the world. And I think they're not sort of given enough credit just because they are not doing the mining themselves or the processing. But also in the Netherlands, we did a survey of a lot of companies that are in this metals industry, both in Europe and abroad, but sort of based in the Netherlands. And most of them were just, they provide a lot of software that improves the operational efficiency for mining operations all over the world, or environmental impact assessments, or just the actual equipment that other companies are using. And they are all over the place, and they are really innovative and really promising sort of companies that are that can also contribute to these goals, even though not directly, but we can, I think, also use that leverage to in this critical raw materials supply chains.
Thank you very much. I don't want to monopolize the panel, so with this I would like to open the floor to the questions from the audience. So I will ask the Slido to come up with the questions that we have. If you have a question, please introduce it in Slido, just for us to see. Oh my God, these are very small letters. Okay, I will try to read up the first one, yeah? Anybody, a glass? It's okay. So in 2004, Rio Tinto started exploiting lithium reserves in Jadar River Valley, finding significant deposits. As the project became known to the public recently, it sparked the biggest eco-protest in Serbia's history. So how... Hey. What was the question? Sorry, somebody... How do we ensure public support for such projects in light of justified concerns? So, environmental question. Who would like to take this question? Patrick, please. Thank you.
This is a very dangerous question. I mean, I think the key, because I know it's a hugely contentious issue in Serbia, that's very, very clear, but I think without going into the specificities of this case, because I think I don't know enough to be able to judge, but in all cases, it gets back to what I said before, you need to assess the potential for having this mind with respect to taking the community on board, respecting their rights, making sure they benefit from it, making sure they're listened to, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you have to do that really, really thoroughly to have any chance of actually avoiding that. And then it's a question in Serbia and that. I don't know enough about the detail, but just as a general idea, I think that has to be essential and to stack the odds in your favor. And that's the same then question for everywhere else in the world. So.
Thank you.
I can just add a little, that's definitely exactly right. But also we've seen this now multiple times where big projects are being cancelled due to environmental concerns and also due to concerns about corruption, etc. For example, Cobre Panama, one of the biggest copper mines in the world, 1.5% of global supply was now been shut down due to exactly similar concerns. So these are really key, and I think there's another area that should be prioritized by governments, which is really, helping or encouraging mining companies to see it's in their commercial interest. Because if to work with these communities, if they don't, these, they really massive investments and massive projects kind of lose out. So I think that's a key area where it's, rather than being seen as a cost, it's actually seen as this is in their own, economic interest. And another aspect I think governments need to, or I think would be important, is if they are increasing the data collection and reporting of these ESG tracking indicators, because we have data on it now, but it is sparse and it does vary, but so we can have a benchmark, clear guidelines on what good ESG performance is, and then that can be used also to kind of monitor projects and make sure projects are improving on this aspect. So those are some aspects that could be important.
Yes, now it works. So I can add to that that from our point of view, multi-stakeholder cooperation is fundamental for these projects. So we support IRMA, the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, and the multi-stakeholder character and governance of that instrument is what really attracted us. So you have there NGOs, local communities, governments, and industries auditing the projects in every possible jurisdiction. From our point of view, the involvement of local communities, above all when there are indigenous communities involved, is key. That's what we are trying to do in the US and also in Chile, where we have monthly meetings with the Council of Atacamenian people to really discuss the way forward for our operations there. Cannot really comment on the Rio Tinto project, but again, multi-stakeholder approach, transparency and cooperation, and also sharing the profit, well, not the profit, but sharing the positive about the project is fundamental. So making sure that local jobs are created and that there are opportunities for local peoples is essential.
Thank you. Let's see the next one. So how can we avoid colonization and environmental injustices dynamics when securing materials? What role should governments play in avoiding 100% profit-driven companies ruling the extractivist sector? So I think we have touched upon this in a slightly different wording. Anybody would like to? Yes, please.
Yeah, I just want to add on that the fact that when we look at projects around the world, and in particular in the countries where we have strategic partnerships, we really look at the interest of the member states, of the EU member states, and how relevant are those countries and those jurisdictions for our member states, and what European companies are there active. So this is how we actually build this our support for the European member states and the European companies active in those countries in order to supply the European market. And we trust and we believe the European companies are responsible in what they do, and they follow the principles, the European sustainable principles when it comes to the extraction and processing of raw materials.
Yeah, as we have touched upon many aspects, but it's so important to reiterate some of them, I think. And it's to say, I mean, clearly the national governments need to fully implement the rule of law. I think there should be no inability to do that. They should also follow up if there's any problems here. And I think just to mention here about human rights, indigenous rights, and environmental due diligence, this is, in the last 12 years, there's been 510 allegations of human rights abuses linked to the mining of cobalt, copper, lithium, manganese, nickel, and zinc, and including 130 attacks on human rights defenders and 49 abuses of indigenous rights. And there's also activities threatening cultural and sacred sites, watersheds, and so on. So I think this is real. This is across the whole world. I've got no idea. I don't know if specificities any here, but this obviously has to be taken seriously. And if there's any criminal acts here, then the government should actually hold them responsible. Otherwise, the law is empty. So I think that has to be the case. And on a more technical procedural approach, I think we should always make sure there's prior informed consent when accessing any land, because that's the starting point for mutual respect. And then all the other things we've already mentioned. But in the interest of time, I just wanted to iterate that one issue in particular.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's jump on the next one then. We are focusing only on securing imports. Shouldn't we focus on reducing the demand? And how could energy demand reduction or energy sufficiency play a role in the critical raw materials demand? I think we also touched upon that topic already. Anything to add or reiterate? Yes, please.
Just to reiterate why it's so important, because, I mean, if you get I think you mentioned 99 times, and I think one of my colleagues gave a presentation that said that if you look at the demand progress, you'll need like 300 more mines in the future. I mean, that's just a number. It doesn't matter if it's 250 or 450, but a lot. So the question here is how, we don't have space for 250, 300 more mines. We don't have space for 99 times. There's no way we're going to be able to stay within ecosystem tipping points and global limits with that. So we need a much cleverer business model. So the key thing is avoid wherever you can, reduce wherever you can, and then focus where you really need it, where it's absolutely essential technologies and materials for absolutely essential things. There's enough added value there for the industrial players, but you don't need to do it as a trade-off with the rest. So just to reiterate that, I don't think it has to be a win or lose, but it could be a focus question.
Yes.
Maybe just add a little bit. I think it has been touched on, but the greater preference for SUVs in Western markets is quite astonishing. The size of cars has just been growing and growing, which has honestly cut out nearly all the efficiencies developed in engines. And we're seeing the same happen in the EV sector, where there's greater preference for larger and larger vehicles, larger ranges, bigger battery sizes, which therefore have more and more critical minerals in them. And often we see that these battery sizes are beyond what the requirements of most uses. It's just for that maybe one trip a year. So this demand side is exceptionally important. This right sizing of batteries is what we call it, is when it's not a preference for such large batteries, which is particularly in the US and Europe, should be an issue that we look at more carefully, because we can cut demand quite significantly.
Yeah, just quickly to add onto that, I think, the issue with reducing demand and also with a lot of this is that it implies also quite a large behavioral change in the whole of society. So not just companies, but also consumers. And it becomes particularly difficult when you're trying to build more supply in Europe or bring more sustainable imports in order to allow people to sort of continue their current lifestyles. But then you also have the public opposition, because they don't want more mining in Europe or more processing in Europe. But they are also not necessarily, not all, but a lot of people are not willing tomorrow to give up the way they live right now in order to reduce demand and really move towards a more sustainable kind of lifestyle. So I think that's a difficult thing for all of us to do, to also reflect on our sort of consumption behaviors as well.
Thank you. Indeed, changing behaviors is one of the most difficult ones. I have actually changed my behavior since May. I'm biking more. So it is not impossible. So next question. With about 90% of CRM processing taking place in China, and a Chinese comparative advantage is arguably being the willingness to destroy its environment to keep prices low, how can Europe compete on CRM processing? Okay, emotional questions as well.
Yeah, well, obviously we cannot compete with the Chinese prices. That's clear because they control the entire value chain and low labor force prices and so on. So we have high standards. We need to implement more and to take care more. So that's why obviously the prices and of our products are higher. But what we are trying to do now is to look at how to actually build premium markets for sustainable products. And this is our advantage. And this is what we need to focus on, to really make sure that we have a tier market where you have your sustainable produced product or critical raw materials, where you know where it comes from. You have a full traceability and transparency of its production. Which would obviously come with a premium price, but then you know what you are choosing. And then coming back to you change the behavior, obviously, how do you make actually the demand side actually buy a more expensive product, knowing that it's more sustainable in comparison to a cheaper one, not so sustainable produce. And this is our challenge now, to actually make sure and that convince the demand side, the OEMs of this world, to actually commit to more sustainable products and to change their behaviors towards premium market ones, green products.
Yes?
Sure, yeah. So I think, yeah, it is difficult to compete, but I think there's some key areas where where it can be prioritized for support. So often with strategic projects, refining and mining, it's often CapEx support that is given, so to help the upfront cost. But obviously OpEx support is also crucial, particularly where energy price, or it can be very effective. And this is what we've seen with the US and the IRA with its tax reliefs for OpEx that has made projects much more attractive. Though then again, we do have to see that OpEx support is more susceptible to changes in politics, etc. So, but these are areas that can be looked at. But I think the key point is exactly what was just raised. So on the supply chain due diligence and on this higher ESG standards, and this Europe has some of the highest ESG standards in mining, refining in the world, and that's really something important to keep pushing and try and value. And I think that will hopefully make a more premium market for, and eventually consumers hopefully choose based on that. So this is a key area as well.
Yeah, I would add something on China as well. I mean, of course, there are some unfair practices going on there, that's clear, but we should also look at the good things, let's say, that China did, because China over 10 years ago, decided that the way forward was electric vehicle and invested heavily in that direction. They really supported their entire value chain, from the critical raw materials to batteries and EVs. They managed to secure access to raw materials outside of China, because China has rare earths, but if we look at the lithium resources, at nickel resources, they are outside of China. So there was a clear willingness from the Chinese state to go in this direction. That's something that Europe should replicate. For instance, we are now discussing about the 2035 ICE ban, and some are asking to reconsider that. From an industrial point of view, it will actually be important to maintain the direction, to give a clear indication to industry that that's the direction to move forward. The other element is the green premium, which is absolutely fundamental to make sure that we have mining and refining here in Europe, because costs are indeed higher, but also sustainability and environmental standards are higher. So we need very simply to internalize the externalities and to make sure that the right price is paid. Right now, we do see customers asking for sustainable raw materials. We don't see yet a reflection on prices. So that's something that will have to come in the coming years.
Thank you for all the answers. Now, let's see the next one. How can local communities local authorities and civil society contribute to ensuring stakeholder engagement for strategic projects in the EU? And how will the EU facilitate this? And which part of the EU should actually do that or has the capacity to do that? So
I think this is a question for me. It's because with the Critical Raw Materials Act, we actually will be working on different subgroups to deal and to tackle certain provisions of the Act. And one of the subgroups, which has been, is mentioned in the regulation, is on public acceptance. So I think that would be a role for the colleagues like yourselves and the coalition, that you have to actually contribute on how, with your expertise and knowledge, on how to actually build this public acceptance and knowledge and awareness raising in the member states. So together with the member states and with the colleagues, the civil society organization, to work together.
Yes, thank you. Could you give an example for measures in place to ensure environmentally and socially sustainable lithium extraction, for instance, regarding water issues in Latin America? I think that's for you.
Yeah, I guess that's for me. So I already mentioned a couple. So IRMA, to ensure the environmentally and socially responsible approach towards lithium, new developments in direct lithium extraction. Regarding water issues, maybe I would like to spend just a few minutes to put the problem into perspective, because we always talk a lot about water use connected to lithium, but the reality is that freshwater use for lithium production is actually very low. We use 7 liters per second of fresh water in the Salar de Atacama, mostly to wash the equipment, so it's not even used in the production. And that's really a fraction of what the tourism industry is using or other mining industries are using for other materials in the region. So what we do there, as I was mentioning, we pump up the brine. Brine is not water. Brine is 10 times more saline than seawater. It has no other use. So it is not used for human consumption. It cannot be used for human consumption. So we make it evaporate and then we refine it. But again, in terms of actual freshwater use, it is very low. But of course, I mean, it will be preferable to keep it there, and that's why we are investing in direct lithium extraction.
Thank you very much. The geological surveys of Europe deliver knowledge of domestic CRM potential and collaborate through EuroGeosurveys, EU-funded Geological Service for Europe project. In the context of implementing the CRMA, how do you see the roles of the geological surveys and a common geological service for Europe? Please.
Yeah, okay. I'll use my science knowledge rather than specific knowledge on this, and also builds on the previous one. We focus on lithium, but of course there's lots of different types of mining. But clearly the key thing is to understand the whole hydrological flows and the basins, where it goes, where's upstream, where's downstream, where it leads. And because I think there you can then, there's some basins which have certain impacts and linked to certain communities and others, other areas. So I think what we need to do to make sure there's a really good mapping of showing the interconnection of the hydrological resources with the wider ecosystems and with the social systems, you know, with the communities. And then you actually, and that should be part of a standard impact assessment to say, where is the best place for this mining? What sort of measures you need to put in place to protect the communities or the ecosystems as well? Because of course it's not just the communities, it's also the wider ecosystems around it. So that would be my contribution, but I don't know enough about the specificities of this.
I know. I can add to that and to Julie's question, the fact that we will also have a subgroup on exploration that will be part of our discussions with the member states. I think that would be a role for the EuroGeo survey to contribute and also to provide assistance to the member states geological surveys, which you are already doing actually. So I think your role is essential in bringing all this together in a European view.
Yes?
Maybe just add a very quick point that many of the geological surveys and national surveys were done years and years ago, so particularly in the global south. So many having these updated is a key area that I think should be prioritized. One, to help these countries understand their potential, and also to just help us have better knowledge of what we really have.
Thank you. I think we still have a bit of time for a question or maybe two, so let's see the next one. How do you assess the threat of mineral-rich countries nationalizing their critical mineral, oh la la, thank you, industries? For example, national lithium strategy in Chile, and how can these threats be overcome? Are there threats? Is this competition? What do you think? Oh, this was a difficult one.
So we do see some countries trying to limit the export of their raw material exactly because they want to have more local value chain. So at least the refining part, if possible, also the additional steps. In the case of Chile, the national lithium strategy is not really a nationalization, actually, because lithium is already nationalized in Chile. It's already owned by the state, and the state gives it in concession to companies. The contract which are currently in place will be respected. That is something that the Chilean state already confirmed. And for the future, for new salares, where it is strategic, 51% will be owned by Codelco, so the national the national mining company, in cooperation with other stakeholders. While recently they also opened the possibility of investing in other salares with a majority stake from the private sector. So nationalization is, well, sometimes a risk, but for Chile, that's not necessarily what is happening.
And I will take the very last question because I would like to know what the panel thinks about that too. So any thoughts from the panel on how we can convince consumers to choose products containing raw materials that actually were produced based on respecting ESG principles? So how can we ask them to pay more for that, I guess?
Well, first of all, I mean, we should look at a range of different measures of making the safe and sustainable choice the easy default choice, and that has to be a sort of an overarching mantra. And then there's the question of what tools you need to use to achieve this. But clearly, as I mentioned before, information, people need to know. That's key. But if it's people need to know, you can't also put all the responsibilities on the individual, because it should be also a default choice rather than simply a choice. The burden of responsibility shouldn't become every single person. They should have agency, yes. They should have information to enable this agency, but it shouldn't be all on their shoulders. So then there's a question afterwards of, okay, how can we move beyond that? So then there's for example, sustainable public procurement. I mean, that's 14%. Public procurement is 14% of European GDP. Everyone talks about EU budget. That's 1% of GDP. So if we can push towards using green public procurement to select and prioritize those products that actually are more beneficial, then that already helps. And then there's labeling, etc. But I'll leave space for others. But just to say that we need to do, have the safe and sustainable choice, the easy choice for everyone.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. I think this is a key question. This kind of talk of an ESG premium is quite a challenging one, but it definitely cannot all fall on the consumer. And creating a market for it is also another area where there is some discussion and whether we can have an actual formal market price for clean critical minerals. For example, nickel is a key example where Indonesian nickel has now dominates the market and has grown substantially through some protectionist measures, but it is done in a very unclean way, particularly in comparison to Australia, which their mining companies are suffering right now and are closing, delaying due to the extremely low nickel price. So this is an area where there needs to be some good thought, and I think it cannot all fall on the consumer. I do think there should be. This is a key part of supply chain due diligence that's in the EU's regulations, and where there may need to be some positive or preference to cleaner nickels, and that doesn't just fall on the consumer and can come from the government level.
Thank you very much. And I have to say we arrived to the end of our session. First of all, a huge thank you for the audience. Great questions. You have seen the panelists were sweating while trying to answer your questions. And the next request is a huge applause to the panelists, because I think they really managed to provide us a lot of topics. So I think we have covered a lot of ground, and with that, I'm sure that you are hungry. Enjoy your lunch break, and hope to see you at other sessions today and tomorrow. Bye-bye.